people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. It would appear that later on this month, WBC minimum weight champion Yoko Valle will be returning to action in what is her native Costa Rica, I believe, to make a defense, what seems to be a voluntary defense of her WBC title against Peruvian fighter Rosio Gaspar. Rosio, who sports a professional record of 12 wins with 2 losses, no draws, 3 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 14 professional bouts. Last in action in December of last year, opposite the ring Tina Ruprecht in the atomweight division, where Rosio lost a unanimous decision. She's likely to lose another one to Yoko Valle in this upcoming fight, sporting a professional record of 33 wins with 3 losses, no draws, 10 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 36 professional bouts. Yokosta's return to this division likely heralds an undisputed run, but can she afford to go on it now that she's not being promoted by Golden Boy Promotions? In case you forgot, Yokosta recently achieved free agency. Last in action in March of this year, opposite the ring Marlena Esparza in what was a flyweight contest. Not a minimum weight contest where Yokosta holds WBC title. Yokosta won a split decision, and as it turns out, that was her last fight under the Golden Boy Promotions banner. Currently on a 3-fight winning streak after having dropped a controversial decision to Senicia Estrada in what was their fight for the undisputed crown. Since then, Yokosta has rebounded off that loss and won 3 in a row, become a world champion again, while Senicia made the decision to retire. And since she retired, all the belts she held have been redistributed. Japan's Yoko holds the WBA, Yokosta's got the WBC, Sol Kudos has the IBF, and Sarah Borman has the WBO. You could give Yoko Valle very good odds to beat every single one of these champions and become this division's next undisputed champion. But to do that, she's going to need some money behind her to draw out those champions. And where is that money supposed to come from if she's not with Golden Boy anymore? She also has a mandatory challenger in the queue in the form of Umi Ishikawa, the WBC's interim champion. The WBC haven't ordered that fight yet, which leaves Yokosta free to take on a voluntary, but at some point that mandate might come down. She draws well enough in a native Costa Rica to fight the Rosio Gaspars and the Umi Ishikawas of the world, but to draw out the champions, she's gonna need a little bit more money. So where's that money supposed to come from? Now, most people figure that even though she recently achieved free agency from Golden Boy Promotions, she may pop up on the MVP side of things alongside her younger sister, Naomi Valle, who recently signed to MVP. Now, that's where the money to finance unification matches could come from, though because her very next fight doesn't seem to be an MVP fight, an MVP show, that is largely speculative that Yokosta will eventually sign to MVP. I think she will, but she hasn't yet. And the very next fight is set to go down later on this month on the 18th. I anticipate that after that, shortly after that, we may hear an official announcement of Yokosta's migration from Golden Boy Promotions over to MVP. And with MVP in her corner, well, then she'll be able to afford financing fights against those other champions. Then she'll have the money muscle behind her to unify this division. For now, look for the ring return of Yoko Valle on the 18th. Men's light heavyweight news. Throwback Anthony Yarde is relishing the November shot at David Benavidez in Riyadh. Now, you can question certain portions of Anthony Yarde's resume, and you can even question his boxing acumen, but not his heart. Now, he's got buckets of that, and he's proven it on more than one occasion. Now in November, he is set to prove it again. The throwback Anthony Yarde is relishing the prospect of traveling to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia to challenge David Benavidez for the WBC light heavyweight title. His trainer, Babatunde Ajayi, has revealed terms have been agreed for England's Yarde, 33, to enter his third world title fight against the undefeated Benavidez on a date in November that has yet to be announced. The contest represents the first of the Mexican-American Benavidez's reign as champion, and following defeats to Sergey Kovalev and Artur Beterbiev, both of Russia, Yarde's first fight at world level since he so admirably tested Beterbiev in January of 2023, 2 years ago. The fight is done, Ajayi told Boxing Scene. We're happy. Everyone talks and we stayed silent. It's always been our playbook. We don't talk until it's happened, yet again. Anthony Yarde is the name that brings the most attention. Everyone knows. This is going to be the fight of the century. I truly believe that. This is what dreams are made of. Every kid wants to go against the Mexicans, their heritage. David Benavidez is the guy that nobody wants to fight. It's a fantastic opportunity. Anthony, as I've always said, is a throwback. He's always taken on the biggest challenges. That's how you're rated up there with the very best. He's a fighter through and through. Though not exactly accurate from Tunde, he said that we don't talk until it's happened, but before we got to this point, he told the world that it was Callum Smith that they're fighting, that it's the Callum Smith fight that was done. Now it's this. So how do we know that this news is any more credible than that news was, or that news wasn't? It's because it wasn't Tunde that broke the news. It was Turkey LL Sheikh. That's how we know. He's going up against the modern-day great. He's always gone to another person's backyard, fought the guy with a 100% KO ratio. He's always been the guy who takes on the challenges no one else wants to take. Saul Canelo Alvarez rather fight this guy. Fought someone else.
Shot at Canelo.
The development follows the death in June of Yarde's assistant trainer James Cook, MBE, following his struggles with cancer. Serendipity, Ajayi responded when asked about the potential tribute to Cook. This fight is going to mean a lot for us, and it's a lot for James and James Cook's family. It's been a long time since we brought him into camp. James was a staple of our team. I learned so much from him, God rest his soul. It's quite fitting. We are fighting a Mexican for the WBC title, Lions in the camp. Let's get ready to fight, because it's going to be a fight. Speculation had persisted that the 28-year-old Benavidez was on course to fight either Yarde's compatriot, Callum Smith, or unified light heavyweight champion Dimitri Bivol. So you can imagine how surprised I was when this news broke. Anthony has an established track record of taking on the Lions, the Tigers, and the Bears. Oh my. The beasts from the East, and now the monsters of Mexico. But a Mexican monster, as they like to call him. That much is established, that Anthony doesn't shy away from the difficult and dangerous fights. The real issue is what he does in between. It just doesn't service as adequate preparation in the buildup of these big fights, because Anthony's had about 2 or 3 fights since his loss to Artur Beterbiev, but they were against lackluster opponents, lackluster competition. You know, there was an opportunity there to do a Joshua Buatsi fight, and for whatever reason, that didn't happen for Anthony. And of course, there were talks of a Callum Smith fight, but obviously, that didn't materialize either. Now, I'm not complaining.
I don't want to nitpick.
Because by now it's established that Anthony don't shy away from the difficult and dangerous fights. If there's an observation to be made, however, it's what he does in the build-up doesn't leave him as prepared as he could be for those big fights. He was last in action against Lyndon Arthur on the undercard of Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank. He fought Lyndon for the 3rd time, the trilogy, and won the 3rd installment. So at least he's keeping busy, and at least he's fought in the last 12 months. But from Lyndon Arthur to David Benavidez, that's quite the step up. Lyndon, at his very best, is a domestic level guy, whereas many would argue that David is world level. There is a chasm there, a gap, as grand as the Grand Canyon between a Lyndon Arthur and a David
Benavidez.
But of course, the focus of this story really isn't Anthony Yarde's track record or his willingness to take on the beasts and monsters in the light heavyweight division. The real focus and focal point of the story is David Benavidez bending the knee and deciding to box in Saudi after saying that he was a Vegas fighter and he was going to focus on fighting here. A PBC flagship fighter is now crossing the street. We've seen several PBC fighters already do that. What are their B-tier fighters like Isaac Cruz and Rayo Valenzuela, David Morel? Alberto Puello is about to on one of Turkey's next shows, as is David Morel for the second time. How'd we get here? The PBC used to be a lot more protective of their assets, let alone their flagship fighters like David Benavidez. How'd we get here? Came across a recent post that indicated El Sheikh had made the deal with PBC, which works with Benavidez, and Benavidez's promoter, Samson Lukowicz, signed off on the one-fight deal. So it's a one and done. Could be. We'll see. Samson Lukowicz, who also used to promote Edwin De Los Santos, recently severed ties to that fighter, saying that, it was probably best at that point that they go their separate ways. It was not at Edwin De Los Santos' request that Samson cut him loose. Samson made that decision after the collapse of the Keyshawn Davis fight. Is he about to make a similar decision when it comes to David Benavidez? Has he gotten too old and too inept to care for these fighters? I couldn't help but notice a stout observation from one of the regulars here on the channel, Steel Mills Boxing, who said, "Bruh, this dude rejected the initial offer to fight Callum just to double back to that same Callum and counter offer because he doesn't want to kiss the rings, quote unquote, just for him to kiss the ring, quote unquote. The mental gymnastics you've got to go through with this dude are unfathomable. Still, good fight, 50-50. I detected no lies in what Steel Mills had to say. Everything he said was accurate and is corroborated by Samson Lukowicz himself.
There's no negotiation. What about Smith? We received a large amount of millions to fight Smith, and we denied.
Did you catch that? Samson admitted they were made a multi-million-dollar offer to fight Callum Smith, which they rejected. Let's hear it again.
DJ, play it back.
A large amount of millions to fight Smith, and
Think about that for a second and how redundant it is. That Turkey already offered you this fight for millions upon millions of dollars, according to your promoter. You turn it down because you don't want to box in Saudi, just to double back to try to fight that same guy. Not get him. Also that you can end up boxing in Saudi anyway, just against somebody else. Veteran content creator T Street Controversy said, "Stop the BS. David Benavidez is arguably a top PBC fighter. Just barely 5 years ago, Heyman and PBC would have told Turkey to F off, and they would have had Yarde fight David on a PBC show or not get the fight at all. Of course, Heyman is still managing these guys, but he does not have the resources to move like he used to. Remember the term, quote-unquote, cross the street? Now PBC hardcores are talking about,
just talk about the fights and not the business.
PBC made it this way.
They absolutely did.
Though some still wish to be in denial about it, a guy who goes by the name Brooklyn Conservative said, once again, here comes the cap. You know Al works for Live Nation, too. He has resources, to which T Street replied, I'm not sure why I'm continuing this nonsense. PBC went from 20 shows a year to barely 3, with dozens of inactive fighters. He don't have the resources in boxing anymore, young man. I'm done with this. You're fighting to the death despite the glaring red flags over there. Ignorance is bliss. That's what they say, and that ignorance is evident here, because it's very obvious that Al Heyman and his acolytes can no longer afford to accommodate their stable of fighters, to the point where many of them are popping up all over the place, where the PBC used to be a lot more protective of their fighters and coined the term cross the street. guys on the wrong side of the street and all that stuff. Now, their guys are crossing all sorts of streets, including one of their flagship fighters in David Benavidez. So you wonder if Gervonta Davis, the only other flagship fighter they have left, might not cross a street at some point. Back over to David. He bent the knee. We wouldn't be here now if he didn't want to. He kissed the rings. After his people had him reject a Callum Smith fight just to double back and try to get it, then failed to get it, he finally bent the knee. And maybe that's what he needed to see. The ineptitude of the people handling his career, the decisions they make, and the resources they don't have.
They're wasting his time.
Consider that if they would have allowed him to take on the Callum Smith fight when it was first offered to him by Turkey, it likely would have been done by now. Hell, we might have seen it by now.
So maybe David finally decided to make an executive decision. Stop letting these guys waste your time.
Elsewhere in the light heavyweight division, per Mike Kopinger via his sources, the Dmitry Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev trilogy fight for the Ring Magazine light heavyweight title was on the Riyadh season schedule for November. Ring Magazine has learned, however, fellow Russians Bivol and Beterbiev both asked Turkey to hold the fight in Russia with different organizers, and Turkey gave his blessing. Now, it's unclear when the third fight will happen.
In Russia, under different organizers. Who in Russia can afford to put this together?
Umar Kremlev and the IBA. The IBA that used to oversee all of the amateur boxing but lost recognition of the IOC and thus became a promotional outfit.
That's what I've been telling you in passing the last few weeks, the last few months, that they're basically a promo outfit now. They stage their own events, their own professional boxing matches, boxing cards.
That's my best guess as to why both Dmitry and Artur asked Turkey to let somebody else do the show. It's because the IBA is going to bankroll it now. And this news comes to us after preliminary reports that the fight between them would not happen this year. Some fallout.
Veteran boxing scribe Jean Zattel said, "I was told by a lot of fans that Bivol vacating the WBC title to Benavidez earlier this year was not a duck because we have to let the trilogy happen." Well, it's not happening in 2025, so was it really that bad a take after all to say Bivol should have defended against Benavidez?
There goes the American journalist hyping up the American fighter.
They always do that.
Caught a bit of heat for it, a bit of backlash in the comments section under that tweet, to which he responded, "Gotcha. Vacate the title to wait a year to fight a 40-year-old Beterbiev, rather than a 28-year-old Benavidez to finish 2025. To be for real, it was Turkey who shot down that fight, not Bivol."
To be for real, Team Benavidez was sandbagging it anyway, because I remember them saying they didn't want to box in Saudi.
To be for real, and if we're going to be really real, a 40-year-old Beterbiev is more dangerous than a 28-year-old David Benavidez, who hasn't knocked anybody out since moving up to light heavyweight, where Artur Beterbiev has been this whole time with a 100% knockout ratio. The only guy that he didn't knock out was Dmitry Bivol. So in what world and by what metric is David a more dangerous fight than Artur?
Share a common opponent in Alexander Vozdik. After Vozdik fought Artur Beterbiev years ago, in 2018 I think it was, he had to take 2 or 3 years off after that from the beating that he got. Whereas after he fought David, he was alright. David didn't knock him out.
He's already rebounded off that loss to David Benavidez. He didn't have to take 2 or 3 years off like he did with Artur. The bottom line is, there's more than enough precedent for a trilogy, and there is no quantifiable metric that suggests David is more dangerous than Artur.
I'm actually okay with the fight happening in Mother Russia because I've always felt that that's where that fight belongs, in front of that audience.